Hi, this is Brett Ingram, entrepreneur and award-winning product creator, and today I want to share with you the quickest shortcut to happiness and fulfillment. I used to believe that happiness and fulfillment were sort of waiting for me in the future at some point. I had ideas about where I wanted to go in my life and what things that I wanted to accomplish. And I felt as though once I got to those milestones and once I, reached this future place in my life, at that particular point, I'd have the career success, I'd have the wealth, I'd have all the things that I wanted that I thought would be the things that would generate that happiness. And so, as a kid, I was sort of, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I had a real great entrepreneurial spirit. Felt like I was going to conquer the world, and I could accomplish anything that I set my mind to. So I had total confidence, and maybe it was blissful ignorance or whatever. Maybe I had no idea about the way life actually works. But regardless, I set out with that sort of mentality and that sort of aggressiveness to achieve what I wanted. And it's funny because I never let anything outside of what I was doing bother me. Other people's circumstances, other people's advantages, it never even fazed me. It never even occurred to me because I had such confidence in what I was going to be able to accomplish that none of that really mattered. My life was all ahead of me, and I had, the ability to work as hard as I needed to and do whatever I need to do in order to get to where I was going. So I set out eager to get there. I couldn't wait to get to this point where I was going to reach the mountaintop and, stand there admiring the sunrise or the sunset and feeling what a superstar I really became. And I knew that, this wasn't just a dream or a fantasy. I was willing to work hard. I was willing to endure whatever I needed to get there. So I wasn't delusional about, what it was going to take. I was totally willing to do the work, and I knew it would be that. But I also believed that it was sort of the end of that road. It was sort of the reaching where I wanted to get to that was going to generate that happiness. It was going to generate that sense of fulfillment and make me feel as though all the things that I ever wanted, now I've got them. But the funny thing is, at times in my life when everything was going great, and all the lights were green and everything seemed to be going exactly as I had planned and envisioned, what happened was my sights just ended up reaching farther out on the horizon to another milestone or another achievement. So, it's not that I wasn't feeling good about what I did. I mean, I was, but I also was so focused on, there's another level, there's somewhere else I can get. And, so I know, like, I'm just going to keep pushing. When I get there, that is going to be where the happiness really is. And, then conversely, because, life is a funny way of not always cooperating and working exactly the way we'd want it to, at times when things were bad and stuff started to fall apart, the economy crashed, my company closed, like all these other things were going on, I felt at those moments terrible. And I felt very far from happy or fulfilled. It wasn't that I was even further away from my goal. I just felt terrible about everything. I had worked so hard and I was doing all these things, and then all these things outside of my control happened. And, it was really unfortunate. So I wasn't happy then either. And I wasn't really happy or fulfilled when things were going well, because while I was comfortable and, confident and everything else, I still sort of, there was still that piece that was missing. And, the fact is, the truth of it is that happiness and fulfillment are not destinations. And that's really the reality of it. They're emotional states of mind. That's it. Emotional states of mind. And that's for better and for worse. Because what it means is we can feel excited to be alive and we can relish each moment of our existence. Or we could pine away for stuff we don't have, lament all the bad luck or missed opportunities, and, focus on what other people have and wish we had everything that they have too. And here's the thing. We can do either of these regardless of whether we are struggling to, paycheck to paycheck to pay the bills and working a job we don't like the whole time, or whether we're water skiing behind one of our many yachts. It really doesn't matter because it has nothing to do with what we've physically accomplished. It has nothing to do with what our bank account balance or our net worth is. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has 100% to do with the way that we choose to feel. In today's social media age, things, all of these sort of mental health issues and anxiety and all these other things have come to a head, and they've become more and more prevalent. And it's not an accident. There's a very real reason and multiple real reasons for that. One thing is, when I was growing up and there was no social media, I remember when I was applying to college, I didn't even know where my friends were applying. I had no idea. I didn't know that nothing was public until they told me, oh, I got in so-and-so and this is where I'm going. I had no idea. And I grew up with high achievers. I grew up with people that while we were very middle class, a bunch of them were, very smart, went on to do very great things. So it has nothing to do with that. It's just the fact that times were different. It wasn't all a competition and everything wasn't so visible. So unless you chose to share, nobody knew. Nowadays, when people apply for colleges, it's all online. So everybody gets their responses the same day. They get released on the same day. So everybody knows if they get into X, Y, or Z school on this particular date. And so some kids are happy, some kids are sad, whatever. So there's so much more visibility. It's so much more in everybody's face. And so you can see everybody else's successes and failures as well. And unfortunately, as human beings, we have a tendency to look at other people's successes and make that, and that makes us feel envious or feel bad, like we aren't doing enough or we aren't enough because we didn't do what they did. But the reality of it is human beings are far more complex than that. There's a lot of other things going on. Your whole life is not encapsulated based on whether or not you got into a certain school, landed a particular job, or earned a certain amount of money. It just isn't. It's far more about the composite of what you choose to do with your time and who you are as a person. And so the problem with social media is that it's created this need for constant contests and comparisons. I know for raising kids in the day of digital media, I know that there's constant postings online. So it always looks like someone's having a party. Someone's having a great time 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, not everybody all the time, but if all you see on your stories are all the greatest things that everybody's doing, it makes you feel like you're missing out. And so you start to compare your own life. Do I have as many friends? Am I doing as many cool social things? And you combine that with the fact that we've entered into an age of relentless achievement. I live in the northeast part of the United States, which is a super intense area to begin with. It's a suburb of New York City. And the fact is, I remember when I was back in high school, I went to nationals for Future Business Leaders of America. And I qualified there. And so we got to go to Washington, D.C., and we got to meet with all of these kids from almost all 50 states. It was probably like 44, 45 of the states were represented. And we were all high school kids. And so, you shared a room with somebody you didn't know, and you went to all these events, and it's the first time ever that all these people would get together and see each other. So I met tons of people, boys and girls from all over the country. And what shocked me and really surprised me is when people found out that I was from Connecticut, they would have a reaction like, oh, but you're nice. And I'm like, of course I'm nice. Why wouldn't I be nice? They're like, oh, well, we heard like it's everything so like, even then they didn't use the word intense, but they meant sort of cold, sort of skeptical, sort of have an edge. And that's a stereotype that exists with New York and the surrounding area. And you meet people, and again, stereotypes, but you meet people from the South and the Midwest, and they were super like friendly and gregarious. And this is long before social media. This is long before any of this other stuff. And so you can see, now when you put all that under a microscope and you ratchet up the intensity level 100 times, it's gotten to a point now where every kid going through high school feels like They need to, they need to excel in school. They need to do tons of extracurriculars. They need to do charity work. There's so many other things you need to do to play the game to get into the right school. And they're kids. They haven't even begun their lives yet. And they're kids and they're already feeling that anxiety and stress. No wonder people need medicine and need, yoga and relaxation to cope because it's exhausting. As a kid, your universe is small and so at that moment it feels so magnified and so crazy. So, the thing of it is, when we see all that, it's very easy to focus on other people's stuff and start to feel bad about ourselves, start to feel inadequate. I remember I was listening to something that Tony Robbins did years ago, and I remember he was talking at one point about something about success. And I think he was at one of his live events, and he tells a story where he met with a guy, and he had said, how do you rate your success or something, 1 to 10? This guy was like, oh, I'm a 3 or whatever it was. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I don't remember all the specifics, but the point of the story is what's relevant. And so the guy stood up and he said, well, tell me like about your life or whatever. And he ran like a 7-figure business. He was a super successful entrepreneur. He had every physical outward trapping you could imagine. He had just every single thing you could imagine you would ever want if you put down a list. And he was like, how could you think that you were a 3? He's like, well, I have all these friends that, they run an 8-figure business and they do this. And it was literally for somebody from the outside sounded insane. But that's literally how this guy felt. He wasn't making it up. And so it isn't about what we achieve, right? It's about the way that we feel about it. Now, let me flip that. There's a woman I know, and obviously for her anonymity, I won't mention any names, but there's a woman I know who has a life that is filled with struggle. She has a relatively low-paying job. That's difficult. There isn't really any way to sort of ascend or get to another place. She has health problems. She has a husband with lots of health problems. She has issue after issue after issue. Her family is separated. She has all of these other problems. She got scammed into some online scam where she lost a bunch of money that she didn't already have anyway. She had a friend who was stealing from her. It's hard to list. She got in a car accident and then another one, and one was her fault, the other one wasn't. I think she was distracted because she was so overwhelmed with all the issues in her life. All these things. Every time I see her, she has a smile from ear to ear. She's so excited about the littlest things. Oh, I'm going to make this dish for Thanksgiving dinner, and my son is coming over, and she's so excited, and she's so passionate about life, and just loves every single thing that's going on. And when you contrast that, it seems almost ridiculous. It seems literally almost fake, because you have this person who on paper should be a 10 out of 10 and a person on paper who should be a 3 out of 10. And yet their happiness levels and their levels of fulfillment are inverted. And it just goes to show you right there, in an absolute nutshell, you can't encapsulate it any better, the fact that our impression of happiness, our impression of fulfillment, has nothing to do with externally things out there or even internally things that we've accomplished. It has 100% to do with how we feel. And that really is what it is. So at the end of the day, we do get to choose how we feel. That is a choice. And so if we let external circumstances dictate that, or we spend our time comparing ourselves to others, then the problem is we're at the mercy of things that are beyond our control. So there are going to be a lot of things that happen outside of our lives that are going to be, and again, we can self-select. If we want to focus on a war-torn area of the world and we live somewhere where it's peaceful, we're already winning. I mean, right? Because we can survive and choose to live our daily lives the way we want, where other people have to fear for their lives every single day. But oftentimes what happens is we focus on the people that are achieving more, that are doing more, that have accomplished more, that have more, or they seem to be happier than we are. And we wonder and we lament, like, why, oh, if only, if only, if only. But it honestly has nothing to do with that. So if instead we make the decision to be happy, to feel grateful, and to appreciate what we do have, then we can be happy and fulfilled. One of the greatest things that I discovered in my adult life as a way to sort of reframe things, and I use it all the time, especially if I'm feeling down or feeling negative, is I just stop and think about things in my life that I'm grateful for. Because I don't have everything I want. I haven't achieved everything I'd like to achieve. Not everything in my life is perfect. But the fact is, I have a ton of stuff in my life that I should be very grateful for. I have a ton of stuff in my life that's better than what other people have. But it's still very easy to focus on what we don't have and feel resentful or envious or whatever. And so by feeling gratitude, by focusing on the things that we are really grateful for and appreciative of in our lives, as small as they might be, as large as they might be, those are ways that we can reframe the way we feel. And we can start to get into a mindset where we're feeling more positive, we're feeling happier, we're feeling more fulfilled. And we can maintain that easier because it isn't based on something that changes. The challenge anytime you're dealing with external things is that no matter how good they're going, they can change. And so because of that, it's always going to be a challenge and it's always going to be a roller coaster. It's not going to stay consistent. But we can control our own thoughts. We can control our own emotions. And so if we choose to focus and be consciously mindful of the fact that we have a lot of things in our lives to be grateful for, it's a lot easier to feel happy. It's a lot easier to feel fulfilled. And when we feel happy and fulfilled, we reflect that happiness and fulfillment to other people, and they reflect it back on us. I don't know if you've ever sort of gone out of your house in a given day, and when you interact with people, if you're in kind of a bad mood and you're a little grumpy, people seem to be a little bit meaner. They seem to be a little bit grumpier to you. I know I've experienced that. And then if you go out sometimes and you're happy and you are, engaging people and making eye contact and smiling, it's amazing. All of a sudden, people seem happier. They seem to be nicer. Because they're reflecting back what we're giving them. And it's super important to always understand that, that's the only thing that we have power and control over. So we might as well take that power. We might as well control it. And we might as well choose to feel happy and feel fulfilled. Because, that's going to be the better way to go about it. The takeaway here is that the quickest shortcut to happiness and fulfillment is just to choose to be happy and fulfilled. I know it sounds simple. I know, it's not always as easy said than done, but external things or events may help when they're going well for us. But as soon as something goes wrong, then our happiness goes with it. So choosing to be happy can be easier said than done, and that's totally understandable. It can take a lot of practice until it becomes a habit to constantly feel that gratitude and focus on being happy and focusing on what we do have and all the blessings we have been given. And that can take practice, and you can constantly find yourself slipping and feeling negative, and then you need to reframe it and go back. But the amazing thing about it is, if you do it enough and it starts to become a habit. So we may have times where we slip back, but by focusing on what we're grateful for, what treasures we have in our lives, and the opportunity that we have to experience each day, we can feel happy and fulfilled. And that's ultimately a much better way to live.